And he gave me rather a funny answer. He said, only one who has loved the master can answer that question. So it is a well-known thing that if you want to know about love, ask a lover. And can love ever be complete? Because some people say how to love the master completely. Is it ever possible? In one way, Babuji has answered that question in one of his books, where he says that when Lalaji attained Mahasamadhi, he didn't know about it until he got the telegram. And then he himself makes a comment on his own love for his master and seems to suggest that had he loved his master, he should have known when Lalaji passed away. No, this is a very surprising statement from the master. Because if you see the case histories in some of the psychic books, many instances have been documented where, for instance, a father who is dying on a ship thousands of miles away appears to the son somewhere in a farm, and later on the son gets the news of his father's death. It seems to have somehow managed to communicate at the moment of death. And there have been many such instances of ordinary human beings having such an intense association with another person. And the proof is this last minute communication of the dying with the living. Now, what is the problem with Babuji and Lalaji? That there was no such, shall we say, communication or even the knowledge of the passing away in the mind of the master. It raises a very profound question of what love is and what is its role in our existence. I do not know whether I should just allow you all to think about this, because it is a very important thing and should be correctly understood. It is my suggestion that when you have loved a person at the very innermost core of existence, the physical disappearance of that person has no meaning. Because to the lover, the beloved is still alive, very much alive. So how could Babuji ever have had an intimation that Lalaji had, as we say in the normal way, died? So that is the secret of Babuji's love for his master. Because had he been conscious of Lalaji passing away, I would say it is a lesser form of love for his master. And the proof is that throughout his life, he said Lalaji is with him. He used to question him. He used to ask for advice from him. Therefore, that is the proof that for Babuji, the figure and form of Lalaji, his physical existence, had no meaning. So that is the type of love that we should speak about when we talk about love in spirituality. It is, however, a limitation of the human emotion and the intellect, that we can only start with love as we know it in the human level. And then we suffer because we are dependent on the form, we are dependent on the name, things like that. But it is precisely that dependence that we have to give up. And this giving up is taught to us by meditating on something which is formless in the heart, light to begin with. So we have to love a physical master, and it is a moot question whether that love can begin or is already existing, whether that love exists already or has to be developed. Because it is of the nature of love that it seeks something. And what does it seek? It seeks the beloved. So when there is a search for something, there must be love backing that search. See? So however much we may wander in our search, this cannot be denied that love is behind it. So this is just to answer one or two questions that were put up this morning, that without love you could not have even searched for a way. And it is my feeling that love is part of human nature. It is what distinguishes human nature from, for instance, what we call animal nature. Animals don't have love as we understand it. Now, I am not talking of the romantic love as you understand it in the West. I am talking of love as humans feel it everywhere. That love doesn't exist in the animals, where a relationship between a mother and its own offspring is an act of instinct. And I used to think why love becomes necessary at the human level. Because nature has in some way brought in love into the picture at this level of existence. And I got the answer only some years after I came to the feet of my master Babuji. And the secret was dependence. See, it's a well-known fact that in the animal kingdom, the baby that is born is almost instantly capable of looking after itself, whereas the human being is totally dependent at birth. And perhaps it is this dependence of the child that had to be protected and allowed to grow into an adult. And the divine benevolence that we call nature somehow planned for it by making first maternal love a part of human existence. It is part of nature of the mother, of the female. And it is my humble suggestion that without mothers, humanity would collapse in one generation. So I can only, of course, this can only be a speculative idea, but it is my conviction personally that when human beings evolved, they evolved with love, so that love could further our existence in so many ways. So to my mind, the greatest distinction between the animal kingdom and the human kingdom is the existence of love. Other things are there, of course, that they don't have intellect, will, we have the intellect and the will. But in some way, it is love which gives direction to both our intellectual and our moral efforts. It is like the gyroscope which guides a plane, for instance, or a beam which guides it. So that is why perhaps so much stress is laid upon love in spiritual disciplines. Because as we discussed elsewhere, authoritarian discipline is easy to enforce but difficult to uphold. Whereas discipline growing out of love is self-maintained, self-created. We are not disciplined by outside, but we become disciplined ourselves. We accept it as a necessity to guide our lives with. So love as a typical human value, as a distinctive human emotion, is not something that we use, is something without which we cannot exist. Now, all that we do in spirituality is to widen the scope of that love. The capacity for love exists. It is directed at one or two persons. Spirituality says, like everything else, it is not for you and your wife or your daughters and sons alone. Enlarge it, widen it, make it universal. So that, to my mind, is the function of human existence. And all this talk of goals and God realization is nothing else but learning to become love yourself. So in a certain sense, we have the animal kingdom without love, we have the human kingdom with love but with a limited capacity to express it. Then we have the spiritual kingdom where the human being who could love in a very, very limited and self-centered sense becomes capable of loving without limit, until in some mysterious way of transformation, that human being becomes love. He or she no longer loves as a verb, he or she is love. This is the sort of transformation that we see going on all around us in nature. For instance, astronomy tells us that clouds of interstellar dust coalesce by the forces of gravity, become denser and denser until it becomes a sun. So that which was dark, which was obstructing the light, by cooperating with the forces of gravitation, no doubt in a mindless way without any will to do so, becomes transformed into a glorious manifestation of light, becoming light itself. And then you find a second miracle, that the very same dust particles which had been destroyed by fire in a second now becomes the sun, which can burn for millions of years and give light. So in nature we have this transformation going on at several levels. Now what is the force of gravitation that we have to use to sort of canalize this love, to make ourselves into suns? It is regulation of the mind. Instead of allowing it to sort of, how shall we say, fizzle out in unnecessary activities. This is the discipline we follow in Raja Yoga, essentially in Sahaj Marg. That is why in yogic literature we find the example of the tortoise, which pulls in all its limbs into itself. Sometimes this has been misinterpreted as ascetic practices. But where ascetic practices are enforced by an external discipline, it fails, because the mind does not cooperate. It is almost impossible to have the mind in one direction and the physical tendencies in another direction. And recognizing the fact that the mind is what originates physical activity, Raja Yoga guides the mental tendencies into one stream, and that is the object of meditation. So this is the secret of human transformation, that we begin, because we are human beings, with a certain ability to love, a capacity to love. Initially we scatter this love in all directions foolishly and suffer for it. If the love makes us search for something really of eternal value, or eternal verity as we call it, then the scattering of this love progressively decreases until it becomes focused on one object. And this process sometimes we call renunciation, but it is wrong. Renunciation must result out of a positive acceptance of one channel for our love. And that is, as Master has said, things drop off which are unnecessary. We cannot claim to have renounced them. So this is how the capacity to love the Master develops. It is not the love itself which can possibly develop, because as Rako said, it exists or doesn't exist. And as I believe in human beings, it cannot possibly not exist, because then we would be that demon of horror, a creation of the scientific laboratories without a heart. So we start with love, we fritter it in all directions, but in the human being there is always this struggle to evolve which is working behind us, whether we are willing to recognize it or not, whether we are willing to even accept it or not. It is a force which cannot be denied under any circumstances. So, earlier if you are wise, later if you are less wise, it does take control one day, and then commences the search for a direction. And that is precisely the moment when our growth begins. And then all the fissiparous tendencies of love become one by one attached to the mainstream of love, and we find a Master whom we are able to love. There are still struggles, because there are still duties to be performed, persons to be loved as we think. And that is now part of the struggle on the path. So there's a big difference between roaming around in the darkness without knowing the way, and then struggling on the path with the Master to guide us. Now we are in very capable hands, and if we only keep him in front of us and follow him, problems drop off more and more, until he is there as the only person in our gaze, in our vision, and there is nothing else to love before us. So when can we love the Master? Absolutely. When in our existence he is the only being that is in front of us. Still the duality of him and me exists, but it no longer matters, because in a sense there is a great deal of fun in having somebody to love, even if it is only the Master. And that is the final tragedy, you see, thinking from a human level, that at a moment in time that figure must disappear, because it is the greatest act of negation of reality, and a negation of truth, and a negation of divinity itself, if our love needs a personal figure for its existence. So at that stage it is the final transcendence of all limitations, and that is the stage when the Master becomes a Master, because now having no lamp in front of him to guide him, he becomes a lamp himself. So this is what I believe to be the course of love in spiritual life. It depends on each one of us, our dedication to the truth, how well we fulfill our obligations to ourselves, to our personal evolution, whether this journey is ever completed or not. But nature will not let us go so easily. As Pikemal said, it is a trap. Life is a trap, but it is an educational trap. It is a refining trap. We are put into it to make us find out the way out of it. And it's a very simple thing if you understand the secret behind it. Because if we will only think how we came into this trap of human existence, we will find out there are two answers to that question. We must have died somewhere else to come here. That is the door into this life. Find that same door, which is death. And this Master beautifully says, die before you die. So death is one of the doors out of that trap. But it must be the right way of dying. I repeat, we must die before we die. Then what they call in science a humanoid comes into the trap. A humanoid in the form of a human being comes into the trap and a saint goes out of it. If we live and die only in the natural way as we are all living and dying, then there is no door out of the trap. It is another door leading back into the trap again. This is the circle of birth and death. What is the second way? However badly we may have been born under any circumstance of crime, violence, rape, a human being is born only out of human love. So in some way we are here because of love. So the way out must also be through love. So love and death, these are to my mind two ways of escape out of this trap that we call existence. And those who have followed Sahaj Marg properly, have followed the Master's teachings properly, will find that it is this love which leads to the death or dying before we die. Because at a moment in our love lives for the Master, it is very definitely a love life. We cease to exist and only He exists. So that love makes us die before we die. So essentially it is one way. So this is my understanding of spiritual love, what little I have learnt at the feet of my Master, what I have experienced in my sadhana. Whether it is true, it is for each one of you to prove in your lives.